Chapter 28. Aogáin's Last Hurrah. "The summer's landed, I see," said Tess as Annabel and Seamie dismounted at the bridge, sporting shorts and T-shirts. "I'll have to look up me swimsuit," she laughed as they ran to greet her. "That'd fairly make them blink," said Seamie as Annabel handed her some cakes she'd made during domestic class in the convent. "Don't be giving them to every Tom, Dick and Harry," she cautioned as Tess gave her a warm hug. Seamie was delighted the two of them had gelled so well, as he had had his reservations initially. As they supped their tea, they filled her in on all the recent gossip and goings-on in their young lives. Seamie had to tell them about the big fight in the playground during lunchtime. Danny Murta, a likeable lad with a propensity for tree climbing, had to help with the milking before school, but as his parents were away on business, he had to do it all by himself that morning. As soon as he ate his lunch, he lay back against the big oak tree and promptly fell into a coma. Aogáin was raging because neither of the day's captains picked him on their teams, so he was bullying for a row. Being a notorious bully and seeing Danny's outstretched feet, he pretended to trip over them. Getting up like a bastard, he accused Danny of doing it deliberately. Protests falling on deaf ears, Danny shrugged his shoulders, brushed himself down and turned away. That was just what Aogáin wanted. Planting a ferocious slap on his ear, he waited to goad him more. What happened next was to change things forever. Known as one of the quietest kids in the school, Danny did his usual, turned away and pretended to walk away. Just as the blow was about to land, he ducked and came up under the Goo's chin with a header few had seen in their short lives. He fell like a stone, completely blacked out. Big Mary ran with a bucket of washing up water and emptied it over the bully to the delight of all. Strong as an ox, he came around quickly enough, but the fight was gone forever. He climbed over the fence into Farrell's field and never returned to school again. It was more than his pride could take. He wasn't missed either. The hero of the hour was carried shoulder high to shrieks of delight from the girls and wild buck-leaps from the boys. Doc was responsible for kicking a new football, a rare treat in those times, into the long grass in Coogan's garden. This was an unmitigated disaster for the school team, as it was hard enough to practice football without a ball. A sudden hush ensued as the inevitable outcome transpired. Coogan was stuck to his shed window as usual during playtime, and Julie appeared from the inner depths with a pitchfork in his hand. Wisps of straw stuck in the black belt that barely supported a pair of greasy trousers. Cursing the children loudly, he waddled like a duck to the new ball, intent on forking it. More like a scarecrow than a human, as wisps of hay hung from his belt, waistcoat and flat cap, he was avoided at all costs by the school kids. Mikey was the captain of the school team at the time and knew that Coogan had destroyed good chances of winning matches before. But this was different. He had led his team all the way to the finals, but despair was suddenly staring them straight in the face. Powerless to do anything about it, as old Coogan could and would make life difficult, the master watched from the window to see if the lads could solve the problem for themselves. Calling Seamie to join him, Mikey issued hurried instructions. As Coogan neared the ball, he heard glass breaking behind him. He turned in time to see the large frame from his shed window fall in smithereens on the ground. Cursing loudly and about to spear the ball, his attention was diverted by hearing more glass breaking. This time Mikey took out the tiny top window from where Coogan used to empty the piss pot onto the dung heap in the yard below. A reddish-brown stain formed an unusual mural, which the kids referred to as the pissed mist, which didn't sit well at all when they took to mocking him. It was a two-way sword, as one provoked the other, with the kids invariably winning out. Red with rage, he moved as fast as his wizened frame could carry him. He couldn't see who the missile thrower was, but he was determined to punish the culprit at all cost. Roaring like a stug pig, he shouted out names of potential wrongdoers. So intent was he on revenge, he failed to see the dung heap until his nose was buried in it. Clouds of flies and dust rose into the air as he tried to extract himself from the foul-smelling manure. A cheer went up as the children saw poetic justice in action. Seamie had by now squeezed under the rusty barbed wire, and, grabbing the ball, he lofted it high over the fence into the playground to the delight of all. Justice was done, and the lads held the barbed wire high as he scrambled to safety. Handing him the football, Mikey announced that he was the captain for the day. A great honour indeed. Meanwhile, Coogan had struggled erect, covered in all kinds of shite. Waddling as best he could into the shed, he banged the iron door behind him as he disappeared in a cloud of steam. Doherty, trying to save face, shouted feeble curses after the scarecrow. The final whistle for the end of the lunch break blew then, and the jubilant footballers headed towards the schoolyard, where Quigley called his young warriors into a circle. "I didn't see all of that, boys," he pretended, "but what I did see was good team spirit. Show that against Sarsfields on Sunday, and you'll beat them home." His words were prophetic. Coogan never troubled the kids after that, not even when the odd ball ended up right beside his shed. He never threw it back, but neither did he prevent the lads from retrieving it. He took to his bed not long after, and didn't leave it until he was waked. He outlived himself, according to Babs. Bappy had enough to contend with besides putting up with Coogan. She was busy being pregnant like most of the other women in the parish. Not only did the church not allow contraception, it dealt a double indignity as well. Sooner than admit the loss of a fetus and thereby benefit from proper medical care, the poor unfortunate had to hide the evidence. Seamie remembered a neighbour sitting on a bed of blood rather than let him see it. There wasn't a sign of it when he returned to the spot a few days later. The evidence had been disposed of. Talking it over with Tess filled him with dread and hatred for a church that could treat his people so badly. Worse still, as soon as the mothers were up and about after their delivery, they had to be churched, which meant they had to go to the altar alone to beg pardon for being unclean, for having given birth. The women of the parish hated this rite, but were powerless against it. The situation was exacerbated if the timing coincided with the missions, the annual spring cleaning. Even the sick and dying somehow managed to turn up for the missions. Everyone knew they were going to get slated one way or another, but it was the women, as usual, who ended up being blamed for all the sins committed. They ground their teeth at the accusations and the blatant incitement of the missionaries. Fire and brimstone was easier to handle than becoming pregnant yet again. "Be faithful to your husband," they thundered. "God's will is to bring children into the world. Let nothing come between you and the Lord." They roared as the men on one knee at the back of the church grinned at each other. "Jesus, I'll have to try that one out after the hop next week," said Joey Mullen. "Who'll you try it on?" "Some poor idiot of a child who'll take your sweets." "I'll get you, Higgin. You can't talk about me like that." "I'll get me father after you." What'll he do? Ride his own ass to Coal Hill Cross?" "That's shocking talk out of the two of you," Big Joe whispered as he attempted to make the peace. "Listen to the priests and forget your nonsense. Shh, here's Father Pat. Move over there, the two of you, or he'll have me above at the altar with the missioners." Despite the railing and entreaties from the Redemptors, life went on more or less as normal in the parish. The age-old game of pitch and toss drew young and old into the circle at Burns's shed before and after the mission, just as it did for Sunday Mass. The missionaries were too clever to get involved in a game as old as time, one in which, if the truth were known, they'd love to be taking part in themselves, as Father McGoy once commented. It was soon after one of the missions that a strange incident occurred that brought wry smiles to many of the parishioners. Close by the Innie, and not far from the mill, there lived a peculiar old gent who was often seen roaming aimlessly along the riverbank. As thin as a skeleton, he seemed to take a delight in frightening folk by suddenly appearing out of nowhere. Of a different persuasion, he was tolerated due to his strange upbringing and even stranger kinsfolk. A landowner, he was incapable of managing whatever he knew was top-quality grazing land, thus allowing a brother to farm it for him. Human nature being what it was, he was soon nearly penniless, but for a small pension from the British Army. The theft of some quality roofing beams from one of his outhouses enraged him so much he withdrew from society completely. The straw that broke the camel's back was the appearance of the same timbers on a local entertainment house. Though rarely seen after that, there were reports of spectral figures being spotted flitting around the front lawns after the witching hour. She wasn't surprised when Seamie told her he had just heard that his skeletal body was found hanging by a bedsheet from the upper window of his rambling ruin. Most of the neighbours attending the wake were there for one reason only, to find out how he died, how much he had left, and to whom. The cognoscenti knew that there was only one place it would go to, but couldn't say that, of course. There were suggestions he had been hoodwinked and blackmailed, but that'd be said anyway, according to Fred Moncrief. Few delayed except the hardshaws that knew they'd get a good drop of whisky, even though the family were parsimonious in dispensing it. Once the gawk stood up to leave, it was time to get on with the proceedings. Heavy rain drenched the entire area the following day as the locals gathered around the main gate. As the hearse attempted to reverse in the narrow gateway, the tail light caught the pillar of the gate and shattered. "Oh, shite!" the Schlieffen grimaced. "That's not a good sign." Pretending not to notice anything, one of the bystanders quietly toe-capped the largest pieces into the long grass while the undertaker went on about his business. The poor man never looked better, it was generally agreed. He was as clean as a whistle, moustache and wisps of hair trimmed and combed, cadaverous jaws filled out with cotton wool, a fleck of rouge to hide the deadly pallor, and, dressed in his best Sunday suit, he looked ready for the journey. Candles were lit and placed in the ornate holders on the rosewood table at the top of the bed. "They'll never get that coffin into the room," John Joe observed when it was realized the body had been waked in a tiny room of the main hall. It was tried, but the pall-bearers quickly realized it would have to be brought in sideways through the small door. Little was thought of it until Paddy Murray said it would be bad luck to turn the coffin sideways going out of the room, apart from the fact that the body would fall around inside. A mild panic ensued until Kelly, the postman, suggested they take the sashes out of the windows and pass it out that way. "Now you're talking, Kelly. Up there for dancing, down there for thinking, McGee remarked. You can't beat the man with the pencil. As soon as the sashes were removed, the men lined up under the window to take the coffin from those inside. A sudden gust of wind blew the curtains into the room and over the candles. The tinder-dry lace curtains caught fire instantly. Flames shot out the window, forcing those standing nearby to dive for cover. Several of the astonished onlookers took flight, not knowing what had happened. Morn cleared the ornate fence into the big field and kept running until he reached the sanctuary of the Kleinen Road. Where are you going? What's up? Concrief asked as he witnessed the sudden commotion from the conquest. There's a new crematorium in Tenelick, Fred. Jesus, Mary and Joseph will all be cremated with him, Campbell was heard shouting into the room. Get out of my way, for Christ's sake. The curtains are gone up in flames. We'll all be cremated if you don't do something. Mulvey was chatting with Mary Dolan when he saw the flames shooting out the window. Jesus Christ almighty, someone should go for the doctor, he said to Mary, who was huddled closely under the umbrella with him. The man is dead, you idiot. He can't die twice. I meant if anyone gets burnt or anything. Do you think I'm stupid or something? You can answer that for yourself, she laughed. Meanwhile, Murta was organising a chain gang to deal with the fire and get the coffin out before it went up in flames. The barrel of rainwater at the side of the house had never come in so handy. The flames were soon under control and the coffin out with the minimum of fuss. Such is life in a rural community, Miss Mills remarked, as order was restored and the small group hurried for the cars before pneumonia set in from the wetting they were getting. The devil himself will finish the job, whispered the Slevene, following the hearse as it moves slowly away from the house. Murta dived into the nearest car to save a drowning. Few followed the hearse as it wound its way to the graveyard due to the incessant rain, but Macaulay's was packed with parishioners eager to recount the amazing story to all and sundry. I'm a long time living, and I never heard the beat of it, the piper's father said as he chewed on the end of his dudeen. There'll be music, song and dance made out of that for sure, Macaulay said as he filled pints of Guinness as fast as he was able to. Go up to Mulvey's for a few bottles of whisky, or we'll have nothing for the rest of them when they come back from the graveyard, he asked his daughter as he directed the woman into the snug. There's more room in the kitchen, ladies. The missus will look after you in there, where it's grand and warm. It's a whore of an evening, begging your pardon, ma'am, he apologised, as the principal of the Protestant school came in out of the heavy rain. I'd hate to be looking in at a coffin in that rain. It wasn't long until the cards were produced and a lively game of 25 commenced.